anyways, family, now for our featured story of the day. Whitney Webb says BlackRock's grand scheme to tokenize the world, and she exposes it. So I want to actually break this down, and shout out to Whitney Webb. She was recently interviewed on this podcast with Mark Goodwin, and I'm going to read you some of the quotes, and then we're going to dive deeper into what this means as tokenization, BlackRock's plan to own the fractionalized world. So yeah, here are some quotes. Larry Fink on Bitcoin's future. Bitcoin is a technology for asset storage, and it is an asset, not a currency. And now they're calling it progress in their new ETF ad, interestingly. If we can tokenize an ETF of Bitcoin, what else can we ETF? That's the ultimate goal. They're coming for Ethereum, ETF. They want to turn everything into an ETF. That's their business model. Now, Mark's observation on tokenization from the pod with Whitney Webb, he said, you will allow BlackRock to build the panopticon of tokenized Earth with Americans' retirement money under the dialect pretext of owning the liberals, unknowingly collecting all aspects of ownership to centralized databases, walled identity gardens, and fractionalized reserve assets transmitted and issued on the private blockchains of Wall Street banks. Now, here's Whitney's critique of Wall Street. Don't trust Wall Street giants. Preach. They become that powerful on Wall Street because they are pretty cutthroat and criminal. That's how you rise to the top of the particular sphere. And she makes a great point there. Of course they're criminal. Now, Mark on the co-opting of Bitcoin, he says, the ETF kind of directly plays against Bitcoin as a currency and really leans into it as a commodity. So we have to just be very careful at basically not allowing ourselves to be useful idiots and cheer on the coming of the tokenized world. Now, here's the conclusion from this particular pod, and I encourage you to watch it and check it out for yourself. I'll include this resource in the show notes below the video in the description. The pod presents a critical examination of intersection between Bitcoin and traditional financial institutions, specifically focused on the actions and plans of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, and its CEO, Lawrence Fink. The discussion reveals a history of financial manipulation, which we all know they have a history of, and a potential co-opting of Bitcoin's original ethos of decentralization and financial sovereignty. The episode serves as a cautionary tale, urging the Bitcoin community to maintain vigilance against the backdrop of political and financial entities that may seek to harness the technology for purposes divergent from its founding principles. Though this reflective narrative, the episode calls for the reevaluation of the direction in which Bitcoin's integration into the financial system is heading and encourages a steadfast commitment to the core values of privacy, freedom, resistance, and centralized control. Now, I also want to point out, quoting the high priest of Bitcoin, Max Keiser, who has been blowing the whistle and not trusting the government and BlackRock and what they're doing as well. Max says, you are not protected against government seizures, and the U.S. government plans to seize all the Bitcoin ETF Bitcoin in the interests of national security. Now, BlackRock and Fidelity already collectively now hold over 200,000 Bitcoin through custodian Coinbase. At the rate they're going to soon have millions of Bitcoin in their possession. So could the ultimate plot be for the U.S. government in the name of national security, ultimately confiscate the Bitcoin and replace it with the U.S. dollar or CBDC equivalent? What are your thoughts? Quoting Max here. Number one, the government seizes the ETF in the name of national security. Number two, before they send you your USD, the price moves up 100,000. Then you pay tax on the gain from the payout, and with what's left, you buy Bitcoin at a price 100,000 higher. Then the price crashes, and now you're sitting on a net losing position from where you started. So keep in mind, know thy enemy. Anything is possible. And just note this, that self-custodied Bitcoin is not equivalent to Bitcoin ETF Bitcoin, because if you don't own the private keys, therefore, it's not your coins. It would be Coinbase's or BlackRock's or whomever is holding the Bitcoin. Now, while the BlackRock chairman was not shy about expressing other aspects of the potential build of tokenized digital markets, these two statements in particular illuminate the coveted path forward for how the biggest institutions intend to be carefully integrated into Bitcoin into the legacy financial system. Larry Fink even went so far to turn the abbreviated noun ETF, an exchange-traded fund, into a verb, gloating about transmuting the Bitcoin protocol into just another speculative commodity. All the efforts of miners and nodes across the world to decentralize trust in issuance and settlement reduced to a paper offering by their iShares division. That's right. Here's Mr. Lawrence Fink right here. The biggest players in the US dollar system are all but clamoring over each other to offer such products to their retail customers. Understanding that the Axum neuters Bitcoin as a viable currency capable of competing with day-to-day bargaining and settlement utility of the dollar, there are many reasons to believe the US dollar system has much to gain from dollar-denominated appreciation of Bitcoin, but significantly less so if the protocol itself is capable of serving the everyday transactional needs of billions across the globe. One of the most common rebuttals to the claim that Bitcoin cannot scale to become a functioning currency is the Lightning Network, the Layer 2. While the trustless method of shared upspent transaction outputs via hash time locked contracts payment channel is quite novel, the ultimate endgame for such model servicing billions necessitates a large amount of liquidity, in Bitcoin terms, locked up within the network. A centralized Lightning Network brings about many issues of privacy, transactional censorship, and even user access restrictions, not to mention the mathematical realities of demand for Bitcoin limited block space when opening a billion channels. Now, many fintech companies such as the Lightning Labs and Blockstream have spent millions in capital developing methods for utilizing Bitcoin as a way to issue tokenized assets, such as stable coins like Tether's USDT, in order to transact dollar-denominated tokens via Lightning channels or federated sidechains. While the institutional adoption dream by early Bitcoin adopters has certainly come to fruition, the actualization and methods of these institutions is clear. Bitcoin must remain an asset, and all effort on scaling is the currency should be directed towards the dollar. Now, Larry Fink himself in the same Bloomberg interview stated, "We believe the ETFs are a technology no different than Bitcoin was a technology for asset storage. Bitcoin spot ETF products encourage many practices far outside the norm of the typical Bitcoin user within the near decade and a half of its existence. An example, trusting a custodian with your keys, limiting exchange to US business days and hours, and aggregating individual exposure into a collective paper claim managed or surveilled by highly regulated brokers. The anti-state revolution that has dominated the most Bitcoin discourse since 2009 has become colored by red, white, and blue ticker tape, furthering the idea that the US has much to gain from the adoption and co-option of Bitcoin is the tangible stash of coins distributed within its borders. MicroStrategy's 190,000 Bitcoin stash, the 215,000 Bitcoin seized from the Department of Justice, Block One's 164,000, Grayscale's 487,000, and GBTC, and now with the new US spot ETF offerings holding a combined now above 200,000 BTC as mass accumulation continues. This is an arguably meaningful portion of the circulating supply of Bitcoin, not to mention the likely possibility of further treasuries held off the books by American investors. Bitcoin is already making the US ETF inflow history as the combined growth within the first 2 weeks already outpaced the decade-long entirety of the silver spot ETF market. Any liquidity needed for an institutional Lightning Network that could compete with legacy payment providers such as Visa and MasterCard is already safely nestled within the borders of the US and thus well within reach of the regulatory arms of the DOJ, SEC, Treasury, as well as the Federal Reserve. So there you have it, my crypto fam. Do you think the master plot is for BlackRock to virtually tokenize everything, as Whitney Webb points out, and that they can also confiscate all the Bitcoin they choose through Coinbase, which already now has over 1 million Bitcoin custodied between BlackRock, the other asset managers such as GBTC, etc. Let me know your thoughts, because that would give the government more Bitcoin than Satoshi himself. Let that sink in, family.